Let's just imagine that the year is 2035. Two nuclear-armed countries are on a brink of war. But this time, the final decision isn't being taken by a president or a prime minister or even a military commander. Instead, an artificial intelligence system analyzes millions of data points in just a few seconds, concludes that an enemy attack is imminent, and recommends launching nuclear missiles. Now, the human operator has only 30 seconds to either trust the machine or ignore it. If that AI is wrong, millions of people could die. Sounds like science fiction, but it isn't. In July 2026, Nobel Prize winners, leading AI scientists, former head of states, and religious leaders gathered in Rome to issue an extraordinary warning to the world. They signed what is now known as Rome Declaration for an Unarmed and Disarming Peace, a global appeal demanding that humanity must never allow artificial intelligence to decide who lives, who dies, or when a nuclear war begins. But why has the world suddenly become so worried about AI? Why are experts comparing this technological revolution to the invention of the atomic bomb? And can India remain a silent spectator while the world's biggest powers race to build AI-powered weapons? In today's video, we'll decode Rome Declaration and understand why AI and nuclear weapons together could become humanity's biggest existential threat, examine what the declaration actually demands, and finally discuss what all this means for India, global security, and the future of warfare. Because the biggest danger of artificial intelligence may not be that it becomes smarter than humans. It may be that one day humans stop making the most important decisions. Now let's pause for a second. Let's understand about this Rome Declaration for an Unarmed and Disarming Peace, which is formally known as Humanity at the Threshold, a declaration on artificial intelligence and nuclear weapons. Now it is a July 2026 global initiative. It is signed by Nobel laureates, by AI scientists, and religious leaders in Rome, and it calls for an international treaty to ban autonomous AI systems from nuclear launch command and control decisions. Now let's understand it from very basic. See, on the 5th of February 2026, at midnight, something happened that hadn't happened since 1972. For the first time in over 50 years, the US and Russia had a zero legally binding limits on their strategic nuclear arsenals. New START, the last treaty standing between the two largest nuclear powers on Earth, expired and nobody replaced it. 11 days later, thousands of kilometers away in Rome, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. It was not the diplomats, it was not defense ministers, but over 200 people, 30 Nobel laureates, former heads of state, Catholic cardinals, and this is the part that should stop you, 20 senior AI leaders from OpenAI, Google, DeepMind, and Anthropic. They were sitting in the same room at the Pope's summer residence, arguing about the same terrifying question. What happens when the finger on the nuclear button isn't a finger anymore? What happens when it is a code? Because here's the number that should genuinely unsettle you. As of January 2026, there are around 12,187 nuclear warheads on this planet. Out of this, roughly 2,100 to 2,200 are sitting on hair trigger alert, meaning they can be launched within minutes of a decision being made. Historically, that decision has always involved a human being which could pause, doubt, and ask, are we sure or not? Now, the question the Rome tried to answer is, what happens when artificial intelligence compresses that decision window from minutes to seconds, where a human can no longer meaningfully intervene at all? This is the story of the Rome Declaration, and why an economist, a scientist, a soldier, and a pope all agreed that this is the most dangerous convergence of technologies in human history. Now let's get the facts straight, because a lot of what's circulating online blurs three separate things into one. First, on May 2026, Pope Leo XIV released his first ever encyclical, a former papal teaching document called Magnificat Humanitas, on safeguarding the human persons in the age of artificial intelligence. Now, this was significant on its own because it was the first time a sitting pope had personally presented an encyclical rather than delegating it to the cardinals, signaling how seriously the Vatican was treating the subject. Now, second, that encyclical triggered something much bigger. Between 14th and 16th of July 2026, an organization called the Domus Communist Foundation convened what it called the Global Nobel Laureate Assembly on Artificial Intelligence and Nuclear War. It was held at Borgo Lodato Sea, inside the papal villas at the Castle Gandolfo, which has been the papal summer retreat since the 1600s. Now, for 2 days, experts presented across 8 structured themes connecting AI risk to nuclear risk. That is the second thing. The third thing, and this is the document you have probably seen headlines about, on 16th of July at Rome's Capitoline Hill, the participants signed the concluding statement. Now, its full formal title is Humanity at the Threshold, a declaration on artificial intelligence and nuclear weapons. Now, its subtitle, the phrase everyone actually remembers, is Towards an Unarmed and Disarming Peace, a direct echo of the language the Pope himself used in Magnificat Humanitas. Who signed it? This is where it gets interesting from a soft powers perspective. Physicist Brian Schmidt, the 2011 Nobel laureate, put it bluntly at the summit: I might reach 1 million people, but the Pope can reach 2 billion. That's 2,000 times more than me. That's the entire strategic logic of why this declaration happened at the Vatican and not at the UN. Because the UN has already been trying and largely failing to get building consensus on this exact issue for years. Now, we'll come back to that, the role of UN, but strip away the ceremony, and the Rome Declaration rests on 2 structural pillars if we see it objectively. One pillar is the 6 general principles, and second is the 5 operational mandates of the Rome Declaration. Now, let's go through the substance, because this is where even UPSC relevance and a real policy meaning also lives. Let's talk about the 6 principles first. Now, they are disarming the next arms race, meaning treating the AI race and the nuclear race as one coordinated problem, not 2 separate ones. Second, responsible development. Then aligning technology with ethics and transparent governance. Responsible use, meaning AI must serve human well-being rather than automated welfare. Then responsible governance, building international oversight specifically for high-risk emerging technology. And then responsible leadership, which means demanding accountability from both state leaders and tech CEOs. And finally, a renewed explicit commitment to total verifiable nuclear disarmament. Now, these are the principles. Now, let's talk about the mandates. And this is the sentence that made global headlines. The declaration states, and I'm directly reading from it, I'm reading this directly: an automated system should never make the final decision to launch a nuclear weapon. This is what the reading says. It calls for a binding international treaty prohibiting the reckless integration of AI into nuclear command systems. Now, it goes further than what most people realize. It says no organization should initiate and no government should even permit fully automated recursive self-improvement in AI systems. Systems that improve themselves without a human being able to monitor or halt them. It demands that nuclear-armed states conduct internal vulnerability audits, specifically checking their command and control systems against AI data positioning and AI data poisoning or even hallucination and cyber tampering. Now, it calls for AI developers as well to publish the ethical principles guiding their models and be held legally responsible when these models violate them. And here's the part most coverage misses. This is an actual new idea invented in Rome. Even on 1st of December 2025, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 80/23, which took note of a joint affirmation made by China and the US back in November 2024 to, quote, maintain human control over their decisions to use nuclear weapons. France and UK made similar declarations. So the major nuclear powers had already on paper agreed with the core principle. What Rome did was take that scattered non-binding diplomatic language and fuse it with the religious, scientific and civil society moral authority, essentially building public pressure to convert a polite diplomatic gesture into an enforceable law. That's what this Rome Declaration did. Now let us move from what was said to why it needed saying at all. And the numbers here are genuinely sobering. According to the SIPRI Yearbook 2026, which is released by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute in June, the global nuclear stockpile stood at 12,187 nuclear warheads on January 2026. Of these, around 9,745 were in military stockpiles considered operationally available, and around 4,012 were actively deployed on missiles and aircrafts. Between 2,100 to 2,200 of those deployed warheads sit on high operational alert, which are launchable within minutes. And SIPRI's most alarming line isn't a number, it's a trend reversal. For 30 years after the Cold War, global stockpiles shrank almost every year. SIPRI now says that decline is ending because the pace of dismantling old warheads by the US and Russia has slowed even as newer production accelerates elsewhere. 9 states now hold nuclear weapons. Yes, 9 countries. US, Russia, UK, France, China, India, Pakistan, North Korea and Israel. And virtually all 9 were, as of 2025, actively modernizing their arsenals, not reducing them. China's stockpile rose from roughly around 600 to 620 warheads year on year, the fastest expansion rate of any nuclear power, while its deployed warheads on delivery system rose from 24 to 34. India's total stockpile grew from 180 to 190 warheads, and for the first time, SIPRI recorded India maintaining a small number of warheads, around 12, deployed during peacetime rather than only in storage. Pakistan sits close behind at roughly 170. Now overlay the collapse of arms control architecture onto this. The New START, the treaty capping US and Russian deployed strategic warheads at 1,550 each, expired on 5th of February 2026. And no replacement was in force. This is the first time since the SALT negotiations, the SALT negotiations, began in 1969 that there had been zero legally binding numerical ceiling on 2 largest arsenals on Earth. Analysts at the Council on Foreign Relations and Chatham House both flagged the same danger. This expiry landed right before the 2026 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, undermining the credibility of the entire non-proliferation regime at precisely the moment it needed reinforcing. Now, if you layer AI onto that unstable base, you get what the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, the organization that runs the symbolic doomsday clock, has been warning about for years. AI's 2 compounding effects. First, which is speed. AI-assisted early warning and targeting systems compress a crisis decision window that used to last hours down towards seconds, eliminating the pause for doubt that has historically prevented at least a handful of documented near-launch accidents during the Cold War. Second is the hallucination risk. Deep learning systems are known to misinterpret ambiguous data, meaning a routine cyber probe or a radar glitch could theoretically be misclassified as an incoming strike. And a global military expenditure recorded by SIPRI hit a record $2.9 trillion in the same year, showing the financial fuel behind its dual arm race. It's not slowing down. It's accelerating even further. Now, this is the part where the Rome Declaration stops being just a science and technology story and becomes something you need to understand across at least 4 different disciplines simultaneously. Let's start with the international relations IR theory. Classic Cold War deterrence rested on something called a security dilemma. When one state arms up for defense, its rival perceives it as offensive and arms up too. And it is an endless loop which carries on. AI adds a terrifying new variable to that loop, which is speed asymmetry. If one nuclear power fears its human command structure could be outpaced or jammed by a rival's faster, AI-assisted systems, it faces pressure to pre-delegate launch authority to software just to keep up. Now, that's not paranoia. It's the literal asymmetric speed and pre-delegation risk. Now, the declaration itself names as a driver of this new arms race. And now bring in ethics and moral philosophy. The Vatican's involvement wasn't incidental branding. It was the philosophical spine of the whole document. The core theological argument, straight from Magnifica Humanitas, is that algorithm lacks conscience. They can calculate probability, but they cannot bear moral responsibility for therefore an irreversible act. And this connects directly to a debate philosophers have had for decades about whether moral agency can even exist without consciousness, and that the declaration essentially takes a hard line that it cannot. Final lethal authority must stay human permanently as a non-negotiable floor. Now, to IR and philosophy and all those things, let's bring in economics and game theory. Nuclear deterrence has always functioned as a repeated game between rational actors who each know the other fears mutually assured destruction. AI threatens to convert this into a game played by non-transparent black box systems whose reasoning even their own engineers cannot fully audit, destroying the predictability that a deterrence theory depends on. So when your opponent can't reliably model your decision-making process anymore, classical deterrence theory doesn't just weaken, it potentially breaks down entirely. And final integration is that of history. The Declaration's opening line draws the parallel explicitly. More than 80 years after the dawn of the nuclear age, we are presented with an unprecedented challenge. It is deliberately invoking 1945, the moment humanity gained a technology it could not fully control and spent the next 8 decades managing rather than solving the danger. The Declaration's implicit argument is that we are at an identical fork in the road with AI. Except this time, we are forewarned. In 1945, nobody signed the Rome Declaration before Hiroshima. In 2026, we are trying to sign one before the equivalent AI nuclear accident happens. Now let's be analytical rather than sentimental over here, because a moral declaration is not the same as an enforceable treaty, and there are 3 structural problems standing on its way. So the first is verification. Physical nuclear warheads can be counted, tracked and inspected. That's literally what New Start's now defunct verification regime did. AI software cannot. It can be copied in seconds, hidden inside classified military networks and updated overnight. You cannot send an inspector to count an algorithm the way you count a missile silo. The second is the absence of binding consensus amongst the actual military powers. Notice who did not sign it in any binding capacity. It is the sitting governments of the 9 nuclear-armed states, the joint US-China affirmation on human control that the UN noted in Resolution 80/23 was a non-binding language. It was not a treaty. Every major military power has strong incentives, the exact asymmetric speed pressure we discussed earlier, to quietly explore automation even while publicly endorsing human control. The third is what arms control experts increasingly call technological fatalism. The idea that private sector AI development is moving so fast that the multilateral treaty processes, which typically takes years of negotiations, simply cannot keep pace. See, by the time a UN body finishes drafting binding language, the technology it's regulating may already be several generations obsolete. For India specifically, this declaration lands at a delicate moment. India maintains a no first use nuclear doctrine and, as per SIPRI, is expanding its own trade, including the 4th Arihant class submarine reportedly entering service around 2027, while also being the 5th largest defense spender globally and the 2nd largest arms importer after Ukraine. India was not amongst the signatory government, but as a nuclear power bordering 2 other nuclear powers, China and Pakistan, the strategic stability questions the declaration raises isn't abstract for India. It's a very regional and it's imaging. So now the final question is that where does this actually go from here? The declaration itself points to 4 concrete next steps. First, converting moral language into a binding UN treaty, specifically targeting launch on warning automation. Now second is establishing mandatory human-in-the-loop architecture as a technical standard across every strategic military command network on Earth. Third is mobilizing public pressure. Nobel laureate David Gross explicitly argued that ordinary citizens, not just diplomats, need to demand this from their governments. And last, that mandating that nuclear command networks be technically isolated from commercial AI and cloud infrastructure altogether. Now, but step back, and the Rome Declaration is really a case study in a much bigger meta theme. Humanity's recurring pattern of inventing power faster than it invents the wisdom to restrain it. Again, I'll repeat, humanity's recurring pattern of inventing power faster than it invents the wisdom to restrain it. Nuclear weapons in 1945, the internet and its erosion of information trust, now artificial intelligence arriving at the exact moment the last Guardrails on the previous dangerous technology New Start expired. Each time we have discovered the same uncomfortable truth. Technical capabilities outruns governments by default. And it only slows down when enough moral, scientific and political authority converges to demand it does. This is precisely why Rome mattered enough to bring a Pope, 30 Nobel laureates and AI engineers from Anthropic and OpenAI into the same room. Not because a declaration alone stops an algorithm from ever touching a launch code. It doesn't, and its authors know that, but because in the long, difficult history of arms control, from the Baruch Plan in 1946 to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968 to the New Start itself, binding law has almost always started exactly this way. As a moral consensus first, built years before it became enforceable law, the question Rome leaves us with isn't really about technology at all. It's the oldest question in political philosophy, just wearing new clothes. When we build something more powerful than our judgment, do we have the discipline to keep a human hand on the final decision? Or do we quietly hand it away, one efficiency gain at a time? Do let me know the answer to this in the comment section. I'll be very happy to read your comments and views. All the very best. Have a beautiful day. Thank you.